Thank you. What sparked the invitation for this conversation was an interview published in the Arts Weekend edition 2 weeks ago. And it was the first time, I think, for many of us, we heard your voice on the October 7th Hamas attack and the war that ensued and continued to rage in Gaza. For me, and I think for many of us present on this call, the interview provided sort of a space to breathe and reflect on a question that is on our minds these days, how we can raise a different voice, a human voice, to borrow from the titles of 2 of your books, in the face of war and its atrocities. And I want to add, and then I'll hand it over to you and I'll spotlight you so everyone can see you. The Hamas attack on October 7th and the war that ensued is having a devastating effect on civilian communities in Israel and in Gaza. They also created a distance, a divide, even if temporary, within the feminist arena in Israel between Israelis and Palestinian activists, and between Israeli Jewish groups and international women's groups. The disappointed and the unmet expectations on both sides, calling for the condemnation and taking action, leave so many of us with a deep sense of despair, imposed silence, anger, and broken trust. But if there's one thing that her story taught us, and the last 71 days have taught us as well, once again, that to transform despair into hope, we must use
ويجب علينا أن نتحدث بصوت عالي وأنتم أول نساء.
So I'm going to spotlight you, Carol, so that everyone can see you. And we'll start with you. I may ask a couple of more questions and then we'll open up.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. First of all, I'm so grateful for this invitation because, I mean, in my heart, I have been so with all of you since this happened. I mean, I knew Vivian Silver, who was murdered at Kibbutz Be'eri. I was in Israel with Women Wage Peace, with Palestinian and Israeli women, saying that there must be an alternative to this way of dealing with conflict, that there has to be a negotiation. And, you know, I mean, I think my question is probably the same as your question, which are, where are women's voices? I don't see women coming forward right now. In fact, I was horrified because a law professor from Tel Aviv came to see me, I think it was last Friday, who had gone to the UN to talk about why weren't human rights groups and women's groups talking about what had happened to women. Just the horror of the violence on all sides. And it was interesting to me, the Haaretz, in the interview, they framed the whole interview with the gender observation, which is that what happened on October 7th, I mean, you know, was a humiliation of Israeli manhood. And the response was just predictable, which is, you know, when manhood is, this is my husband's work, when manhood is shamed, violence is imminent, and women retreat into silence. So the question, I guess, before us is, how can women who are, you know, as you said, Hamutal, mothers in the sense of caring about the next generation. I mean, that's what it means to be a mother. It means to basically to nurture and to bear and to take care of life. How can we use our voices to protest against the violence that's going on? That's basically the question. So, you know, what I know is that when violence starts, I mean, I think as women, we start to get scared and we protect we want to protect our families, our children. And there's a tendency to retreat into silence so as not to provoke more violence. But I think the question is simply, because I'm not in Israel now or with the Palestinian women in person now, as I was when we all went into the Judean desert with Women Wage Peace and we all spoke together, I think that women's voices are, speaking, in a sense, speaking as mothers who care about children. Our voices seem to me to be essential right now. That's what I think. And then I think within each of us is a voice that says the obvious, which is this is not the way forward. I mean, violence is not the solution. It's not going to solve this problem. I don't know, Khamatal, what more ask me a question. What more would you like me to say? But I think that it's interesting that the Yael, the Haaretz reporter, brought a gender lens to this, and I don't think that's really been a lens that this situation has been looked through, which is the assault on male honor and the silence of women, the silencing of women. So I think what we're talking about is breaking a silence.
We are, and in preparing for this conversation, I went back and reread pieces of your books, and I listened to an interview. And I remember there's a great quote, which you repeat in the interview, and it's also in the book, is, do you want to know what I think, or do you want to know what I really think?
Yeah, actually, said that to me one day, and it was when I'd asked her a question about morality, which I think is absolutely key. And she said to me, she looked at me, and I don't know if it was my hair or what, but she said to me, would you like to know what I think, or would you like to know what I really think? And it took me a while to understand what she was telling me. And what she was telling me is that she had learned to think about morality in a way that differed from how she really thought about morality. And what's more, she was aware of this difference, and she could tell me what she thought, or she could tell me what she really thought, depending on what I wanted to know. And I think in the course of growing up, we learn that we don't often say what we really think. It's what I call, my current research is called breaking the bargain, which is the bargain of silence that women make with patriarchy as the price. If you'll include us, if you'll like us, if you'll love us, if you'll promote us and so forth, we won't tell you what we really think, or we won't tell you how we really feel. We'll say what you want us to think and feel and so forth. So that has completely, when I wrote my book, my current book is called In a Human Voice. And basically, the clarity of that book came in part from the 10 years I spent listening to girls. And each one of us here, of the hundreds of us who are here, every one of us has a girl inside of us who has a voice that will say what she really feels and thinks. And our relationship to that girl is absolutely crucial. Because she's offered a lot of incentives not to say what she really thinks. But my book is called In a Human Voice because the voice of care ethics, which means it's an ethics about paying attention, listening, being present with yourself and with other people, not being careless or indifferent. And we know, and you certainly know, as Israelis and Palestinians, the costs of carelessness and indifference. You treat people carelessly or with indifference, and you humiliate people. And the result is they start acting in ways that are, really upsetting. So my book is called In a Human Voice because the voice of care ethics is a human voice. It means it's in every human being. That's where we begin. And if a person is careless or indifferent toward other people and themselves, the question has become, what has happened to this human being to make them act that way? Now, I say in my new book, the different voice initially was heard as, quote, a feminine voice and associated with women because I heard it by listening to women and because it's a voice that joins reason with emotion and the self with relationships. And the voice it differs from is not a man's voice, it's a patriarchal voice, which means a voice that's linked to the gender binaries and hierarchies, which is what patriarchy does. It divides human capacities into either the masculine or the feminine, so that caring is feminine and military strength is masculine. And it privileges the masculine and it silences the feminine. I mean, a patriarchal society or religion or institution it privileges the voices of a father or fathers. It elevates some men over other men and all men over women. And it depends basically on male violence or the threat of male violence as a response to any assault on male honor or power. That's how I think you can look at, October 7th. And it depends on male violence to uphold its hierarchy of male privilege and power. And it depends on women's silence to keep its secrets, because we, in fact, know things, we know things about men, we know things about children, and it depends on not saying what we, quote, as you said, really think. So where patriarchy is in force and in force, and, I can talk about the United States, you can talk about Israel, Palestine, the human voice is a voice of resistance. And care ethics is an ethics of liberation. It frees democracy, where everyone has a voice, from patriarchy, where only some people have a voice. So I would say right now, given the current situation, freeing that human voice, hearing that human voice is essential. And it's not just a woman's voice, but it is a voice that is careful, not careless, about human life.
Thank you so much, Carol. And when, I think in a different voice, you mentioned the Vietnam War years and the fact that exams and graduation ceremonies were canceled in Harvard after the National Guard came in and shot students that were demonstrating. And that was, to me, somewhat reminiscent of, there are various reasons why we keep silent. And you mentioned many of them. We want to be loved. We want to be promoted. We want to be accepted. We want to be part. There are many reasons. But I think these days, women and people, not only women, people are keeping silent because if they don't, they pay a really heavy price. People are even now paying a price for their thoughts, even if they didn't voice them, or even if they voiced a very simple statement showing care and compassion or pain over civilian casualties in Gaza. So I think that perhaps the question is my mind is how we make voices heard when the meaning of making your voice heard is you may end up paying with your job or with your admission to the university, or be publicly under public scrutiny. And I think there's real fear. So how do we make voices heard when it's really scary to speak up?
Well, I think, I think you're right. I think there is, if you talk about breaking a silence, which is what I think we're talking about, there's an investment in the silence of women. And so when women start to speak, there is a cost, or if anybody starts to speak against and to say what in one sense is obvious. What's happening, what happened in Israel, what is happening in Gaza, to children, to people. So there's a cost of speaking. What's the way? I think you know a lot about this, first of all, you can't be alone. So you have this organization, Mothers Against Violence. I have a hunch, and I'd be interested in what you what other women think. But I think there are two things that contribute to when women become hesitant to speak. And one is that sense of, in so many ways, we've been taught to think we are not the experts. We don't really know. And I think by calling this Mothers Against Violence, it's saying we know a lot about how you sustain life, but because we've done it. I mean, as mothers, whether we're literally mothers or whether we've just taken care, we've done what mothers do, which is to basically take care of human life. We know. And so I think the first is to really stand on the basis of what we know in terms of the alternative to violence is voice. The alternative to the use of force is for people to come together and to talk with one another. It's the only way, and to listen to one another. The second thing I think that as women, that in our experience, can we trust that if I stand forward and I say what I really think and feel, will other people be with me? And specifically, will other women be with me? Because I think that there's a sense in which we have learned as women that we're supposed to align with men and kind of look at other women who speak and judge her. And I remember I've started interviewing girls again this year. I have a project called Breaking the Bargain, meaning the bargain of silence that women make with patriarchy. You know, if you will include me, if you will like me, if you will love me, if you will promote me, if you will let me be with you and so forth, I won't say what I really think. I'll say what you want me to think. I mean, and that's a bad bargain. It leads to anxiety and depression. It really undoes democracy, because if you have women not saying what we really think, then you can have women voting and it makes no difference. I mean, so that explains how you can have women voting in a way that sort of, in a way, is hard to understand. So I think these are the two things, Khamatal, as far as I know, which is the ability to trust the value of your own experience and knowledge, to say, wait a minute, I know something about this, and I know that there's a problem with what's going on now between Israelis and Palestinians in terms of the violence that's been just, I mean, it's hard to believe this is 2023 and we saw this massacre of people on October 7th. And then this just what felt like kind of endless just in bombing of children and civilians. And that's justified one. So the first is to stand on the basis of what we know, to trust what we know, the value of our own experience. We know about what sustains life. That's what we do as mothers. And can we trust that if I speak, that other women will stay with me? So I was going to tell you, among the girls I interviewed, high school girls in the US, and the question was, if you could change one thing about the world, what would you change? Two girls said, what I would change is people's judgments. That is the readiness of people to judge other people without really knowing them. I thought that was very interesting.
It is. I think it is. I have so many thoughts following up on what you said, but as we are in conversation, we're all in conversation, and the chat is bubbling with comments and well, questions, and so if that's okay, we can take a few questions.
Yeah.
Good. I wanted to say, in order to ask a question, you can raise your hand or you can write it in the chat. If you raise your hand, you can just ask your question in your own voice, which is probably preferable. The way you do this is you press on the icon of reactions and you choose raise hand, okay? I'll do it so that you can see me. What you do is you press on reactions and you choose raise hand. Okay? Yes, thank you. So I see 2 hands are already up. Let me see which hands they are. Just 1 second. Okay, so I have 4 hands raised. I have Yifat, Ilana, Yael, and Efrat Freiman. So Yifat, you go first, and then Ilana, and then Yael, and then Efrat. We'll take like, is that okay? We'll take like 4 questions, or do you want a question answer?
Yeah, let's do that. No, let's do 4 questions.
Okay, so Ifat, Ilana, Yael, and Efrat. Please, go ahead. Ifat.
Thank you, Khumutal. My question regarding
We can barely hear you. Can you hear
Is it better?
Ifat?
Can you hear me better now? Okay,
Yes,
I'm gonna.
now it's better.
Oh, no, it's good. Okay. So my question is about the concept of moral injury, which is
yeah.
presented in the book. The concept helped me think in a new way about like the transferring of trauma from maybe one population to another, because October 7th felt like Hamas was determined to take some of the misery that has been handed down to Palestinians and just spread it and share it. But when I think about it even more deeply, to begin with, our occupation of Gaza, and I hope I'm not offending any of my Israeli friends in the way that I talk about it, but our occupation is also sort of the collective psyche of Jewish Israelis acting out our own moral injury and trauma from the Holocaust, which in turn was acting out what Germans felt was the humiliation of after World War I. So it's a very unfinished thought, but I'm saying, like generational trauma, we deliver this moral injury from one oppressed population to another. And when I'm trying to think of the origin of all male humiliation that gave rise to this violence, isn't it actually capitalism? Which leads me to what I actually wanted to ask you. Does any of your work tie the ethics of care and the different voices to criticism of capitalism?
Khumutal, are we taking 4 questions?
As many as you say. You want to take 2? You want to take?
I mean, I can speak to that just very quickly, which
Okay.
is thank you for picking up the concept of moral injury. And the thing about moral injury, it's Jonathan Shea's concept, and I think it's very powerful. It's about the shattering of trust that comes from the betrayal of what's right. And that sense, when the betrayal is sanctioned by someone in a position of legitimate authority. And I think that, I mean, what's happened is a sense of the betrayal of what's right on the part of certainly Hamas in the massacre of October 7th, and then in the response of the Israelis in the bombing of Gaza, that there's something that you feel is just not right about this destruction of human life on both sides. Now, you know, would I just connect moral injury? Moral injury is a shattering of trust, and you've seen that happen. The question of what do I, you know, what leads to a shattering of trust? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember. The second half of your question was about capitalism.
Yes.
My second half was if we trace the origin of all trauma, the trauma that we hand to one another, one nation to another.
Yeah, well, if you traumatize people, if you shatter their trust, that is what trauma does. It shatters trust, absolutely. So yes, you can understand this, but then to do more trauma in response is just to perpetuate this. That's what I think. Isn't that why we've come together to say, this response is only going to further traumatize. It's a further moral injury. How do you stop this cycle of intergenerational cycle of betrayal of trust, and the response is and where you feel that this betrayal is legitimized. I think that's where the question of mothers' voices can come in, is to question that legitimation. I mean, whether it's on the part of the Israeli government or whether it's on the part of Hamas that justifies this violence. That's what I think. Because I think it's a voice that would challenge that justification. And what Jonathan Fay says in his work on moral injury, which I think is profound, because the society or the community has been complicit in the betrayal of what's right, the whole society has to be involved in the healing, that everyone has to be involved. And then you say, so here is a moment, because women know something about listening. I mean, that's the first thing, that you have to start by listening. And women know about caring, because we do a lot of, women, including often women of color, we do a lot of the care work in the society. So our voices become crucial. Mothers against violence. Violence is not the answer. That's what I think. That's why I think women's voices are important. And I think it's like, where do we figure out how our voices can be effective in breaking this silence? And how can we undo the experience we've all had of being judged or excluded or betrayed by other women, so that we don't know, can we really count if we were to step forward and say what we really think or how we actually feel? Let's just say when we see children killed on both sides of this, can we trust that other women will stand with us and say some version of, me too, that's how I really feel too. That's how we all feel. And, you know, I mean, look, I'm not talking as though I'm living in some, I mean, in America, if you follow US politics, 53% of white women voted for Trump in 2020. After, I mean, an explicitly misogynistic man, contemptuous, so forth, you know, insulting to people. And so you have to say, what has happened to the voices? What's happened to the voice of women? I mean, that wasn't true in the States for Black women, by the way.
Thank you so much, Carol. So we'll take questions from Ilana and Efrat, and then from Tamar. So Ilana, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask if you could please relate to jihadism, Islamic extremism, because this is something that I'm struggling with right now, because I'm on the side of dialogue and peace work and activism. And I'm struggling with the face of Hamas and their call for total destruction of Israel. Should I pause, or can you hear from there? Okay, can you hear me?
I think she, could you hear Ilana's question?
Yeah, I just went to get a pencil.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so just like what, you know, like, is it an appropriate response in the face of a large population of people who want the total destruction of Israel, men, women, and children? Is dialogue the proper response for that? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there a time? I also don't believe in killing children, but I'm struggling with the question of how do you not, like, do we see this as real pure evil, and is that something that needs to be annihilated? And is it something like, can you expect people to do tshuva? I don't know if that's a word
No, I know. I know.
Okay. So like, can you expect people like that to do tshuva? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there a path in dialogue, or do they need to be annihilated? That's my question.
You want to do 2 other questions?
Sure. Efrat and Tamar. Efrat, you go first and then Tamar.
Hi, Professor Gilligan. I'm Paul. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked to talk about Mothers Against Violence in one of the demonstrations. And I tried to talk about Sally Ruddick's theory, maternal thinking, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's the really, Sally talks about, sorry, she was my professor for many years, talks about the practice of being a mother that makes you develop a philosophy that opposes violence. As it's not a psychological theory, but I'm sure that over the years you had the opportunity, Professor Gilligan, to connect the 2 theories, okay? The one thing that I've noticed immediately is that we have to start, when talking about these theories, we have to start by explaining, oh, men can do maternal work, or men can develop ethics of care. So we start with an apology. We start with, don't worry, it's not only for women or for females. It's, men can do it too, or men can come to the same conclusions. And that's a bit of a hassle. I would just like to hear from you how over the years, what did you use in order to not begin every public lecture with an apology that you're talking about women, but men can be there too.
You want to take another question, Carol?
Let me deal with these 2 questions, because let me just say with jihad, I mean, honestly, if you're dealing with a child who's completely out of control and just destroying things right and left, I mean, that's not the time you can sit down and have a conversation. You have to stop it. I mean, you know, I mean, that's what I mean about, I really feel that in so many ways we have been taught that we can't, it relates to the second issue, that somehow our experience isn't relevant, isn't valid. We know a lot about what happens when people are violent. I mean, ostensibly we teach our children that's not the way to deal with conflict. So no, you know, if somebody's saying, like, you know, if the Israelis are saying we want only the Jews from, what is it, the river to the sea, half the people who use that slogan don't know which river or which sea. Or then the Palestinians say, no, we want only the Palestinians from the river to the sea. So if both sides say, we want to annihilate you, no, we want to annihilate you. I mean, that's not the basis for a conversation. But on the other hand, we know that violence is not the way. As long as people are being violent, it's impossible to listen to one another and to hear, or even to be, the first step in an ethics of care is to be curious to that, what is the experience of the other person? And honestly, I mean, in the whole field of developmental psychology, the question has changed. It used to be, how do we overcome self-interest? How do we learn to take the point of view of the other? How do we gain the capacity to love? Now it's not. It's that we start out as human beings, all of us. We were born with a voice, with the ability to communicate our experience, and with a desire to live in relationship with others, not alone. And so the question, if there's somebody who basically is clueless, emotionally clueless, or is into jihad or something, the question is, what has happened to this human being? Where is their capacity for empathy? Where is their ability to listen? Where is their ability to be curious? And you really have to start there. So let me just say, it's my experience, and I've been at this for a while now. If I say more than one sentence about girls, just more than one sentence, the next thing that somebody says to me is, what about the boys? And that's really interesting because for years, the only things psychologists talked about were the boys. And nobody said, what about the girls? I mean, literally, nobody said it. People studying humans, studying boys and men, nobody said, half the human race is missing. So I'm very suspicious about, we have to apologize because we're not talking about men. It's like for 1 nanosecond, we stop talking about boys and men. And the point is, it's all relevant to the boys because the study of girls led to a very different look and understanding of boys and boys' development on the part of 2 of my former students, Niobe Way, whose book Deep Secrets, Boys, Friendships, and the Crisis of Connection inspired this Oscar feature film. Was almost won the best foreign film, this Belgian film called Close. And my student Judy Chu, who wrote a book called When Boys Become, quote, Boys. That is how boys are often said to be. And then she said, but boys, in fact, often know much more than they show. So that's why I titled my book In a Human Voice, because the voice of care ethics is a human voice. And if you're going to, silence a human voice, there's a cost to be paid. And it's a cost that men pay as well as women in different ways. So I know Sally Ruddick. I knew Sally Ruddick. She was a very close friend. I love her book, Maternal Thinking. I love her writing about the mothers in Argentina who protested every week until about their disappeared children. And I think that's what we're asking now is, how can we have an effective voice and stop this insanity?
Thank you so much, Carol. There was a comment here, which we will get back to in the chat. But Tamar, you're up next. And then I have a hand raised, but I have no name. I have a phone number, 904-142-421. So you're next after Tamar. Go ahead, Tamar.
Okay. So first, I'm very honored to listen to you today. A lot of my work here in Israel with Israeli leaders is inspired by your job. So thank you for everything. And I've founded an initiative here in order to double the number of women mayors here in Israel. We have an upcoming elections now. And I want to ask about women leaders. It seems that they're in this bargain. If you are a leader in a position of power, you're facing this bargain like harder than everyone else. And also, in your books, you spoke a lot about the concept about women saying what they want and what they want to achieve and achieve power seems selfish. So they have both these problems, like standing up and saying, I want to lead is one problem. And the other one is that they are right in the middle of this bargain when your risk is the stakes are very high because you are in a position that you have a lot to lose. So how can we support these women, and what did you learn that can help us support these women in this situation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We just saw 3 women college presidents who were asked in Congress, are you against genocide? In this case, genocide of the Jews. And all 3 said it depends on the context. And I thought, wait a minute, where is their voice? I mean, was the cost of becoming president of the university that you lose your voice? You lose the capacity for leadership, exactly what you're saying. And yes, so that is my current research. I thought, wow, it's just exactly what my current project is. And it's a very bad bargain. I mean, it really is a bad bargain because the cost of silencing oneself ostensibly as a way to be included or liked or loved it's a recipe for depression and anxiety and despair and so forth. And it also undercuts democracy because then you can have women in all these positions and it makes no difference. But I think we're at the point, I mean, I know this, Ariella and I talked a lot about this. And I've experienced this in my own work with girls and women in the States, although I think the time is different now. I think these issues are coming to a head. And that's why I was so happy when Xamuttal reached out to me and told me about Mothers Against Violence, because I really think this is a moment where it's like too much. We've seen these ways of dealing with things are not working. I mean, it's just simply not working. I mean, the thought that the way you're going to make it possible for two peoples to live basically in some relationship with one another on this same piece of land is to sort of bomb the hell out of them. I mean, it's like, who thinks that? I mean, that would really actually work as a solution to this problem. And at the same time, we've seen what happens when a people feel humiliated and not seen and not heard. I mean, they become capable of unthinkable violence. I mean, really unthinkable violence. And so in that sense, I mean, I remember the Haaretz, Yael, the journalist, said to me, "Am I optimistic?" And I just think we've seen the failure of ways of dealing with things. So I think it's a moment for, and let me say it, a different voice, a human voice, which will resonate with men too. It's not a woman's voice, it's a human voice. To come forward and to speak and to say, we need to have a different way of dealing with things. We need to find a way to listen to one another. I remember the film, what was it called? The Gatekeepers, the 6 Shin Bet, people who said they had used all kinds of violence. They said in the end, it doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't work. And so I remember the filmmaker said to this one of them, the oldest guy, would you talk to, at that time, it was Ahmadinejad, the head of, in Tehran. And he said, yes, I would speak to him. The voice is the only way. So this is a moment for a human voice. It's the moment for a different voice. And I really think the crucial issue from my experience, I mean, what can I offer to you? I would offer anything I could to you. And my experience are 2 things, is to trust the credibility of your own experience. I mean, as mothers, we really know a lot about what sustains human life, what is necessary, the kind of attention, the kind of listening, what you do when a child is out of control, how you make peace in the household. I mean, and the second thing is, what would it take to believe that if I take a stand, I can count on other women to stay with me, so I'm not all alone? And to counter this judgment, who is she? She's so selfish. Who is she? Who does she think? And all this kind of thing, because that's an old strategy. And I mean,
that's basically the concept of the project, is for women leaders to be a community that supports each other and validates one's feelings and one's thoughts and one's voices.
And to say, what are the commonalities between or among Israeli women and Palestinian women? What do we have in common? What we have in common, and the we can include across the gender spectrum, all of us have had experience in taking care of life, taking care of children. We know what it takes. Not the idealized mother, but the day-to-day, the work of it. What you taste, how you have to pay attention, how you have to listen, how you speak to people when they're upset, all of this kind of thing. So we know a lot, but we have, and what would it take to think, if I speak, I can count, there will be all these other women, what do you have, hundreds here, who will stand with me? I mean, I think that would make all the difference. And I think it's when the going gets tough, when you start getting attacked, and I can guarantee you, what the bad woman is called. The first thing she's called is selfish. The second thing is that she's wrong, she's bad, she's crazy, she's hysterical. We all know this, but it's not true. So that's what I think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yofi, I see you have your hand up, and then Ariella and Mirav. So why don't you go first, Yofi, and then Ariella, and then Mirav Maze. Okay?
Thanks, Khomuttal, but I think we do have the woman with the phone number.
Yeah, but where is she?
Oh, okay.
There you are. And what is your name? You're on mute? Sorry, you have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. Okay?
Okay, I'm really sorry. I'm on my phone, you see, and so it's not so easy. Sorry, and I don't know how to put my name on the phone. My name is Ella.
Hi, Ella. So you're up next to
Hi.
ask a question.
Ella Maor. Okay, sorry, I don't know how to do it on the phone. I can't add my name.
I know you. Hi, Ella. Go ahead. Ask your
Oh,
question.
Ted, okay, I have a little question, if I may. Thank you very much. I feel, yeah, thank you. My question has to do, and you said it, you mentioned about the women who voted for Trump, you know, which I'm sure there are many, many reasons why and how, and voting against someone and all that whole thing. But, you know, in Israel, like probably most countries today, the women who actually are in the government, I mean, there are women who are being heard, but I don't think they're women who would be attending this talk tonight. And that is something that, you know, over many, 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 many years, that kind of voice is very disturbing. And I'd love to hear your opinion about that, please.
Xavier, should we take another? I mean, where are the women who aren't here tonight?
Well, where are the women
Uh,
who are not, you know, I don't know, don't hold a moral, ethical stance that perhaps I don't know even how to put it, to tell you the truth.
You know, it's hard. I'll tell you something. I really am interested. I mean, I'm thinking of two things. I mean, I'm thinking of one thing, which is if you really devote your life to raising children, which a lot of women do, not only women, men as well. And I mean, and all the love and all the work and all the anguish and all the thought and everything else that goes into that. And then you see these children killed or bombed. I mean, it's like something has to happen for you to think that that's okay. It's just not okay. And so I think one of the questions is, what keeps somebody who devotes themselves to nurturing life from speaking out against violence? It just seems so, in a way, obvious that one would. But I have to say the other thing, and this was really when I was in Israel, when there were more women in the Knesset, when women wage peace was going on. And that's where I was told about Ezer Kenegdo. And that, you know, in the book of Genesis, long ago, somebody, it just struck me, probably, I wondered if it was a woman, it doesn't necessarily have to have been, saw that men are going to be susceptible, you know, to sort of the patriarchal structure and call and everything else. And that women were created because we had to pull in an opposite direction. Otherwise, it was going to end with, you know, how the story, the second creation story ends with, and he will rule over her, that she will only, you know, want what he wants and know what he knows. She'll have no voice. And so, in other words, it's in our tradition that women have to help by opposing. And I can't think of a moment where that's more true than now. That we really have to help by opposing these group of men on both sides that are driving this situation. I don't see, I mean, you know, in the picture that went with the Haaretz article, it was a photograph of 3 men. Where are the women? And you can say that's in our tradition, that we were created because we are, in a sort of sense, to the side of a lot of this. And we've been entrusted, a lot of ourselves, with nurturing and preserving life, which means securing the future. And so I think for us to step forward and say, okay, we're going to speak now as mothers against violence. And we know, I mean, what is it that we don't know that we need to know in order to, you could say, have our say right now? And we're not a minority. As women, we're a majority. And at least for the moment, Israel as well as the United States are democracies. So we, you know, we potentially have a voice that could have a lot of power. So the question is, what's interfering with our ability to say what we know and to stand with one another? Those would be my questions.
And I think that's the question on everyone's mind. Yofi, you're up next, and then Ariella, and then Mirav.
Thank you, Xamotal. Shalom, Carol.
Shalom, shalom.
It's more of a thought or sharing one of my explanations of why many of us, I can speak for myself, I usually do have a public voice, and I have felt silent and paralyzed since October 7th, and I mostly share and retweet things than say things myself. And I think one of the reasons is that the notion of, you said trust, and I think trust is related to truth somehow, semiotically, and to right and wrong. All of those things fall apart in the sense that there's no commitment to facts anymore. We have lost, due to hard and consistent work of our populist government and the media that trusts that voices it. We have lost not just the ability to know what's right and wrong, but also the motivation to even try, not right, what's true or false, okay? So what are the facts? And then with right and wrong, the idea that even these horrid atrocities that we were faced in October 7 there are people that can reframe them and contextualize them. And I'm not even talking about the world. I'm talking about the fact that there are counter demonstrations next to the demonstration to support the families of the people in captivity. There is a how can you have a counter demonstration next to the families that want their dear ones released? So I feel like almost there's no point, because everything you'll say, there'll be some either human or a AI bot that will silence you today. The story today in the cyber world is there is a critical segment in an American TV channel against Netanyahu that has been again and again removed by Facebook, because the Netanyahu forces the work behind are complaining to Facebook that this is or to Twitter that this is an offensive content. So you can't even have fair play or fair grounds for a conversation. So I know this is kind of incoherent, but I feel like the main challenges that we have in order to trust using our voice is to trust that there is a point to search for the truth, and there is a point to inquire on what's right and what's wrong, and I'm puzzled there. That's how I feel, why I feel paralyzed.
Ariella, what's your question?
Thank you so much, Yofi. Yes, Ariella, what's your question?
You're muted.
You have to unmute yourself to be heard.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I agree with Yofi, and there are many issues, and what Yofi talked about is exactly how I feel. But this is going into the Israeli politics inside, which is a terrible ground and really above everything else. I mean, I don't know what's above and under, but it's a terrible issue. But I would like to ask a question, because what happened obviously whoever is on this Zoom, and you know me, we come from the area of talking and believing. and I like the word human voice. But what happened on October 7th wasn't human.
Nope.
And the atrocities were against women, children, elderly, but a lot of sexual violence against women, and not only rape, but really fractures and breaking hips and tearing breasts, really in a way that, and you know my personal losses on that day, and we've spent time together, you, me, and Vivian, looks like in a different life.
Right. At your
And
house in the north,
at
yeah.
my house. But something happened on October 7th from the point of view of our beliefs. And talk about trust. I don't know if you met Ronnie Kedar from Nativa Asara, who saw people who worked for her husband raiding their village, Arabs she knew from Gaza. And the issue of trust and our belief in the human voice, in the human nature, in people, and Vivian's beliefs, they were shattered. And I must say that I have a difficulty that each time you talk about it, you mention our bombing in Gaza. And I don't have to tell you how difficult I feel with bombing, especially children in Gaza. But my question is really more to maybe find something, maybe I'm looking for something that doesn't exist. How do we go on from the terrible, terrible things that happened on October 7th? Personally, I feel that I can't go back to my beliefs. I don't know anymore what's true. I don't know what's right and wrong. What's human? And still, I believe that there's nothing else to do but to talk. And I tell everybody that we talk to the Hamas by negotiating with them about the kidnapped, and it's not hostages. There was people who were kidnapped from their homes. And we do talk to the Hamas. So maybe there is a way to talk to somebody, but how can we live with what happened on that day, with the horrible things, except by putting it aside and forgetting it? That's probably the easiest thing to do, but something that will give an answer to those things we believed in and were shattered on that day. I was interviewed in so many places, and they all asked, what do you think Vivian Silver would say today? So first, and this was a question. So at first I used to say, oh, she would still believe in peace. And then one day her son said, well, I know what Vivian said till October 6th. So I repeated his answer. But the truth is, I'm sure, being so close to her, that she would also be devastated. Did we believe in the right thing? Do we believe in the right thing? We have to address this special issue, I don't know how to call it, in a different way, and not just, weigh it, okay, the bombing and October 7th. October 7th was a different scene from a different universe. And if you can talk about that a little bit. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, both of these comments, I mean, I agree with you, Yofi, about trust and truth.
Take a shower too, David.
I agree about the relationship of trust and truth. And if you cannot believe, if you don't know what's even true, then you don't know what to trust. I think, Ariella, we all know that what happened on October 7th was horrifying. I mean, I don't even, if there's a question to be asked about that, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's almost beyond comprehension. Honestly, the idea that of all people to be murdered, Vivian Silver, I mean, is something so brutally. It's just, I think the only question to be asked is, what could lead a human being to be capable of doing something so horrendous? Because the fact is, human beings did do these horrendous things. I mean, it was shocking. It was beyond what one could imagine. For me, it raises the question, whatever we were doing in the past, it didn't stop that from happening. So there's no point in just doing the same thing all over again. And I don't even think, I don't think the equivalence thing, it doesn't really go very far for me. I mean, there's something so horrifying about the sexual violence toward women. It's horrifying that the human rights organizations didn't respond to it, that, the women's rights organizations didn't respond to it. I mean, it was shocking. I also, to think that the way to stop that is, how do you destroy people, or how do you get rid of people who are capable of doing things like that? That's really the question, right? Because nobody can live next door to people who are acting like that. And the question is the way you get rid of them by bombing them? I don't know that doesn't produce more of them. Because you humiliate people, and specifically, there is a dynamic we all know, which is when manhood is shamed, violence is imminent, and women get scared and women become silent. So where's the hope right now? That's really the question. What would Vivian do? How can we continue? And to me, I think that it's very appealing to think about, wait a minute, a lot of mothers in this world, is this a possibility? Is this an avenue of is this an opening? What if women came forward and to speak not as Israelis or Palestinians, but as mothers, and to say, this has got to stop, that it's just crossed a line now, that what happened on October 7th was beyond horrendous. And then violence, bombing people, and creating a whole, granted, it's not to say that Hamas doesn't set this up by putting their headquarters in the hospitals and so forth, but still, how do you stop this situation? That's the question. And would women's voices speaking, or would voices of mothers, not women, but mothers' voices, because if anyone has devoted their life to caring, that's mothers, is this the possibility? And then I think the next question is, and what is it that we collectively as mothers want to say right now? That to me is what's the issue. What do we as mothers, we're a huge group, what do we want to say? Because there has been, I think, an incredible silence on the part of the mothers of all of the children on both sides, and parents and so forth, who have been killed.
Thank you, Carol. Mirav, you're up next. Mirav Maze. And then Yael Gapel.
Okay. Thank you for being with us in this difficult time. And I appreciate the voices that were mentioned here that bring like the voice of just not knowing what to do, not knowing what is right. But I do want to ask about the choice of Mothers Against Violence. As far as I have seen, try to bring up a voice for bringing back the kidnapped people, but I didn't hear a voice that is talking about the violence that is happening in Gaza from the Israeli forces. And I know that, maybe that's something that is too difficult to talk about now, but for me, it's missing. I would want to be a part of a voice like that, and I don't hear it even within this group. And I want to bring up the question and the difficulty of bringing up this voice, and still how we can still do that.
I'm wondering, I find myself thinking, what if every woman in this group started by saying, just for herself maybe, to begin with, what you really think, how you actually feel about everything that's going on now. And also, I think there are certain things we know that are true. We know what happened on October 7th in those border villages and in these kibbutzim. And we know what's happening in Gaza right now. So what if we started with that, and with the question of, if every woman was to write, what I would like to say right now. And then to look at, there will probably be a range of things, like a chorus of voices. And it would be interesting, maybe the first dialogue should be within the group about, can we be interested and curious about each other and what we see, what we know, what we want to say about this current situation, as a way leading to how can, as a group, we make a public statement and have a voice that would have an effect, because mothers as a group are a huge majority. I mean, that's a large group. I mean, I think that must be your goal, Hamutal, right? I mean, to mobilize, a voice that would really change things, right?
Yes. I think, yes, that would be the end goal. But I think that to go back to so many of the things that were said here, we're not a tribe yet. We should be members of the biggest tribe, the tribe of humanity, right? But I think that what we see happens, especially in time of war, is that as women, as mothers, even as peace activists, we're sometimes divided by our primordial tribal affiliations, meaning our nationality. And we're not necessarily coming together as one tribe for humanity. I haven't given up on that yet, though. We have 15 minutes and at least 4 more women with their hands raised. So let's take 2 questions at a time. So we have Yael Gapel, and then Noah Baum, and then Lauren Stern, and there was another hand raised and disappeared. So Yael, go ahead, and then Noah, and then Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Carol, for doing this. And again, thank you, Hamutal, for doing it. You've been like a saver for me, even though I'm in Hawaii. It's been like really saving for my soul. I want to address, Carol, 2 things that you said that I want to address. You talk about motherhood as a unifying force that is to sustain life, to be pro-life, because we know how to do it. And of course, I cannot not agree with you on that one. But I feel, and that was very much in my research for me, that is much, much more diverse than unified. And women and mothers have different voices within them. And just as we are pro-life and sustaining life, we're also, a lot of women are pro sending their children to be combat soldiers, being proud of it, wanting them to do that as part of their, I'd say, as part of their journey as mothers. now we're not going to get into the depth of it because it's a very complex issue, and we can, blame whatever. I don't want to get into it, but I just want to say that it's, for me, a much more diverse voice, and as mothers, I think it's very complicated for me as a mother myself, and for me to look at all the mothers as one. The other thing I wanted to relate to is the voice, because I think for me, what was really painful is the silence of a lot of men and women that I really have a lot of respect for, and I think they have very clear views, and they were not, I didn't hear them enough, or I didn't hear them a lot at all. And that was very, very painful for me, because I suddenly felt not just that my belief in my whole thing was shaking because what happened in October 7th, because the atrocities were so horrific, but also suddenly, like my spiritual fathers and mother were not there anymore. So the combination is really a challenge for me now, and I do agree with you totally that we gotta find what's the hope. Where's the hope? What can we grab and go with? Thank you.
Do you want to take another question or
I
respond
want
to
to say one thing
first?
quickly, because it just occurred to me listening to you, that one of the reasons that, as what I'm saying is, not that we hold the same values or anything else, I'm saying we have experiences in common, that we know a lot about what it takes to sustain a life, to bear a life, and so forth. I think that our voices are silenced because we're told that we would be, quote, selfish if we're concerned with, what does it do to our hearts if to, have a child who we have invested so much in, or other people's children that we've taught or whatever, killed. Just that. And we think, oh, that would be selfish to think of myself and my own feelings. I'm going to think of the glory of, you fill it in, Israel, Palestine, this. I'm saying, I think there's a voice of experience that could come forward now and say that whatever we have been doing up to this point has not worked. That I agree with Ariella, it crossed a line. It just crossed a line. This has to stop. This cannot go on. And the question I have is, for all of us, where is our voice? The voice that says what we really think and feel. It's not a tribal voice. It's a voice that is based on our experience. And I think that that's the voice that could, in fact, break a silence now and make a difference. That's what I think. And I can't think of any other group right now that's located in the society that has this much experience in common about the kind of investment it takes to sustain life. And we're living at a time where the future of human life on this planet is in jeopardy. So this voice of care ethics, if you want to put it that way, is a voice that basically is crucial at this moment. And I think it's extremely important because women know a lot about care, because that's what we do, a lot of what we do. And I think we have learned to speak in a way that's often disconnected with what we know firsthand in this way. And we don't, if we don't support ourselves, we don't support each other. And I think that's been the real puzzle, is what keeps us from standing together. It would be as though, anyone else who has common experience, sailors know a lot about the sea. Caretakers know a lot about caring. That's basically it. So we have a little time. Let's hear from the other people.
Yeah, so we have Noah, Laurent, and Nirit. So let's take all three questions quickly, and then you can respond, and then we will need to wrap up. Noah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm from Israel, but I live in the United States now, and I don't know if there's a way to respond to this question, but what's been really hard for me is I think a lot of the silence is because of the shock and the grief. And I think also the only way forward is really to create change with motherhood across the borders. And right now, I can't imagine Palestinian mothers doing anything other than just try to survive, especially in Gaza. And you know, it's like, how am I going to live tomorrow? And can I feed my children? And so how do we manage to confront this patriarchy mindset and patriarchy dominance when within the Israeli society, with all its challenges within the patriarchy in Israeli society, we're still almost light years away from what is happening within the Palestinian society in that regards. And so I feel that there's these gaps that make it overwhelming. So for me, that is part of what the silence is about. And I'm wondering if you have suggestions or ideas or anything from your experience to help with that as well.
I was going to say patriarchy counts on this silence, counts on it, depends on it. It cannot go on without this silence. Patriarchy is maintained by men's violence or the threat of men's violence and by women's silence. So the question is, this is about breaking that silence, breaking the bargain.
And Noah, I believe you're Noah Bound of Noah Bound Storytelling, correct?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Okay, so I think part of breaking the silence is encouraging women to tell their stories and collecting and documenting women's stories around atrocities of the war. This is something you and I can talk about at some point. Lauren,
It's something I've been doing all my life, but thank you. I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Okay, Lauren and Nirit, go ahead, ask your questions. Where's Lauren? She has disappeared.
I'm
Okay,
right here.
Okay, so ask your question.
I think Nirit was waiting before me.
Okay. No, go ahead, Lauren, and then Nirit. Okay.
Okay. Professor Gilligan, it's such an honor. I'm going to be brief. We've spoken about breaking the bargain. And my question is, how do we not compromise our voice? And how do we not change our voice and what we want to say while seeking power and when trying to get to these, you know, power stands in society and in different, policy changing institutions, let's say.
And the last person, and then I'll answer.
Nirit, go ahead and ask your question. You're the last one to.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and moving evening. And I would like to say that what worries me the most is that when we'll wake up from the horrifying experience we are going through, we will find ourselves shocked at what we have done in Gaza. And I'm not forgetting for one moment what happened on the 7th of October. And I also keep on thinking about the men who are being sexually abused right now in Gaza. But for me, I would really hope that we would stand together as women, like four mothers did before, and stop the war and call for the return of all the hostages, because every day we wake up and we hear how many people are dying. And I don't think that their death is going to bring a better future to our people. And it really devastates me. So that's what I wanted to say. It's not so much a question. It's just really something I hope will happen.
Thank you, Nirit.
I think, first of all, it's been very moving to me to be in conversation with you about about this. Just to be with you, even by Zoom. I wish we were in person together. There are a few things, it seems to me, that we know now that we didn't used to know. First of all, let me just say we all have a girl inside us who would say what she really thinks and feels. And it's very important to kind of connect with that voice inside ourselves. Before we kind of, you could say, made this bargain, I think it's, if we go back to what Xavier asked me at the beginning, this woman who said to me early on, would you like to know what I think, or would you like to know what I really think? It's really important for all of us to say what we really think and feel, and to listen to one another, and to be curious. And maybe it's not one voice, maybe it's many voices. I mean, the voices of mothers, plural, against violence. And I think maybe, but the other thing is to watch out for, I don't know what the Hebrew equivalent of the word selfish is, but I mean, the way we shut each other down and shut ourselves down by thinking it would be selfish to pay attention to my own feelings. This notion of the good woman is selfless, that she's constantly responding to other people and doesn't listen to herself. We need to listen to ourselves and to each other, and then to look for where are the openings. I mean, where we can bring into the public this communalization of the trauma. I mean, there has been just horrendous trauma. And we know trauma causes loss of voice, loss of memory. I mean, it interferes with our ability to live as human beings with ourselves and one another. So I think that as women, I think we know more about what has silenced us. And I just think, I'm just so encouraged that you've all come together as mothers against violence. And because I think that if you think violence is the answer, we have seen horrendous violence now. And I don't know, I think there has to be, well, if I would say there has to be a different voice, there has to be a human voice that says there is another way to solve human problems other than by massacring people and bombing people and so forth. But that what's been going on has to stop. That to me is really clear. And you can't continue doing, that's the definition of neurosis. If you keep doing what you've done in the past, and it just is a process of self-defeat. So here are two peoples, and they have to find some way to live with one another. And I think Mothers Against Violence says, if I'm hearing you correctly, violence is not the way. So then the question is, what is the way? And if you can come forward, if we can come forward, what is the way? That would be the argument. But it does strike me, we know a lot more. We know what silences people. We know what causes violence. It's almost predictable that what Hamas did on October 7th was going to provoke huge violence and retaliation on the part of Israel, because it was such a humiliation of Israeli manhood. And there's a gender dynamic playing out now, which is another reason why I think that it's appropriate to say we are mothers, and say across the gender spectrum, who are against violence. And we understand this gender dynamic, and we're not going to be controlled by it. So I hope that some of this is helpful.
It is, yes. Thank you so much, Carol. I think that your voice, your human voice, was something I think we needed to hear. We needed the encouragement. We needed the challenge, I think, of how we come together and make our voices, our diverse voices, heard.
I think it's
I think I listened to you so attentively, and I think I loved what you said about curiosity. I love what you said about curiosity. There's a wonderful poem by Eva Kilpi where I couldn't find the English version, but she says, I love curious people. I love people who can say, that's so interesting. That has not crossed my mind, more than people who will say, well, this is what I've said all along. So I think that there's something about curiosity that to me always comes with that generosity. And so thank you, Carol, so much for the inspiration, for being with us in community. And I think for helping us come together around these big questions of how we make our voices heard. And Daphna, who's been documenting the conversation and sending points from the chat, last comment that she sent me was that I said to Ella, you have to unmute yourself for your voice to be heard, So I think that, yes, we have to
add to that
unmute ourselves.
I say to my students, is I say to them, notice what happens when you replace judgment with curiosity. Just notice what happens when you replace judgment with curiosity. So anytime you hear yourself judging yourself or judging other people, try to see what would happen if you replace the judgment with curiosity. I wonder, and so forth. And unmute yourself. I love that. So your voice can be heard. The voice that says what you really think and what you actually feel and what you would say, if another phrase, if you were to be quite honest.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Toda rabba.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Toda
And this conversation will continue.
I would love to be part of it, so please include me.
We will. We will. We need you.
Khmutl, thank you so Toda.
Thank
Toda.
you, Carol.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Toda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Laila tov.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and sorry, thank you to our two fabulous